Those companies that don't continue to kind of experiment and don't understand that arc, right? That storyline of how they're changing it. You got to constantly be changing your story, right? Everything's changed. You're not just bringing yourself or your project. You're telling a story, right? You tell this narrative, right? Once upon a time, there was this person or this company that's in this situation, and unbeknownst to them, right? There's a superhero that comes in. There's like this protagonist, right? There's this potential savior solution that's going to deliver them to safety. Right? It's going to deliver them a result that they hadn't anticipated. And so, you've got to tell that story. Entrepreneurs and salespeople, that are just, transactional in nature, which I think, it's one of the problems with the way that a lot of commerce is done today, right? When people are really well informed, right? They're going and doing all this research, and we have a lot of people today that are just simply order takers. Order taking doesn't work if you're an entrepreneur. Right? Order taking works when you sell a commodity or when there's a transaction because of an inbound inquiry. It's very different to have that storyline, that arc of the storyline of, once upon a time there was this guy, came across this solution that measurably changed his life, right? That measurably changed the game for the business. And I think that the failure for the entrepreneur is not telling that story, is not really identifying how this fork in the road, right? You're at this moment in time, and you can make a decision to continue to go exactly how you're going, or we can make this adjustment. You can make this investment, and if you make this investment, this is where it leads you, right? It leads you to this happily ever after. And that road that you're on right now, you may get there, but it's going to take longer. It's going to be more expensive. It's going to be more full of hardship. It's going to have more challenge. And truthfully, if your product doesn't bring value, right? If you can't tell that story, if you can't articulate the value you can bring, you're doomed. Like you're really in a challenge. I think it's probably one of the most, the preeminent things that a business owner, an entrepreneur, or a salesperson really has to grapple with and get their arms around before they endeavor into a venture. Because without the clarity of how you can kind of get that person to that happily ever after, you're really in an uphill battle. And you're going to constantly be arguing about price, and that's a race to the bottom. And that race to the bottom comes quick. And you see these mature businesses that start to commoditize, and they're not bringing more value. They're not doing anything innovative. They're not doing anything creative. And all of a sudden, man, they go off a cliff. And one day they're here, the next day, right? All of this incumbent, entrants that are in there, and the real challenge for legacy businesses, like businesses that have been here for a long time, that when they don't focus on improving their value and they start to get into this price war, they don't have to deal with all the new companies. The new entrants don't have to deal with the legacy systems. They don't have to deal with the old service and all the stuff that you have, all the burden of your previous historical business. And so they can do it much leaner, right? Much more efficiently at a much lower cost. And, probably even more painful than that, all the heavy lifting you did to sell your product, they come in and they just jump in and say, oh, we're just like them. And they take your business, right? Because they're just waiting, they're waiting for you to screw up. Legacy businesses have challenges that new entrants don't. But, those companies that don't continue to kind of experiment and don't understand that arc, right? That storyline of how they're changing it, you got to constantly be changing your story. Right? Everything's changed. We've talked about that phrase, so many times in the past, but everything's changed. You have to be nimble enough to realize that the world around you is changing. And if your story doesn't change to meet the changes, if you're not able to articulate something that's going to help that business, have measurable, sustainable growth over time, you're in for a really difficult ride to the bottom.